All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the 172nd Governance and Risk Call here in MakerDAO. It also happens to be our last planned Governance and Risk Call for 2021. My name is Peyton. I go by Pros11 online, and I am one of the governance facilitators here. Very happy to be kind of moderating this call. I'm joined here by a bunch of awesome Maker folks, both those who work in the community, those who are interested by it, and kind of everyone in between. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you if you're watching this later on the recording. That is a good spot to remind our participants that we are recording this call, so please try not to speak over one another. With that said, we do encourage participating, right? We want to get your questions and comments, so if there is a pause in the conversation, feel free to hop on the mic, or for whatever reason, if you're not comfortable asking your question yourself, you can drop it in the chat, and I'm happy to do so for you. I think that mostly covers the kind of housekeeping rules. We do have a bit of an agenda to get through today. I'll be guiding us through. As always, we'll start with our governance roundup until we move on to our community discussions. If there's time left after those, we will have an open discussion portion. That's where if you have anything not related to what we've been talking about, you can save it to the end. Or if anyone mentions anything in chat, that might be a good topic to close out on. I will bring it back up then. So without further ado, I'll get back to what's happened in the world of governance and our votes in particular. Was a bit of a lighter week this past week, however, needed a bit more room to do a proper explanation for how our polls came out. So we had 3 weekly polls that ended. The first one being a modification to the delegate compensation trial that we're running. That did pass pretty convincingly. So that will take effect this month for the end of December when we send out our payments. I guess that would be the first or second week in January, depending on when we have the executive. They will be based on this modification. The 2 other polls we ran were a little bit unique in that they were signals more for the Maker Open Markets Committee, particularly dealing with our DAI direct deposit module over at Aave, and what rates and debt ceiling felt the community should be targeting. So for those, had a fairly close vote, though still fairly decisive as well, on the net rate spread. This was voting on having a negative 0.5% spread, basically saying that we should target Aave having rates about 0.5% lower than our ETH vaults. And the other one was a ranked choice vote on the target debt ceiling based on real DAI supply. As you can see there, overwhelmingly in favor of the 30% real DAI supply, though several did support 20% real DAI supply. And for those that are unaware, that's essentially the supply when you factor out the recursive leverage. So on sites like Aave and Compound, you can basically deposit a stable coin, borrow some of it, and then kind of fold it back into itself a bunch of times, right? So kind of taking out that recursive portion, we were asking what percentage of what's left over should we be targeting for the debt ceiling. So the Maker Open Markets Committee will be meeting next month, and we'll kind of take these votes into consideration when they make their next recommendation. All right, those were the hard ones. We can go on to the next slide, which is our Greenlight polls. We got a few days left. The last green lights for this year end on Monday for AUST and a new GUNI v3. This would be the DAI and Paxos pair. So if you haven't had a chance to vote yet, please do so. As a reminder, the spread on the votes of Greenlight polls is what's important. So even if a poll is already leading one way, you still continue to participate, will have an effect on the prioritization. That wraps up polls. Next, we have our executive votes. Getting a little bit easier this week. Our last executive did pass. That included changes to wrap stake ETH as well as Matic A and the debt ceiling, and for wrapped ETH A, some of the liquidation parameters as well. We also switched the source of the MKR vesting proposals. We're present or saw the recording. It would be about a month ago now. I don't know. Time is hard to tell, but we did have that discussion here on the GNR about the sourcing for our MKR vesting, particularly that the contracts were set up to mint it, and there's some community discussion. Ultimately, the community deciding they would rather pull those funds from the MKR and our POS proxy, essentially our community treasury. Next week, there is no planned executive. In fact, the earliest time we're planning to have one is January 7th. However, I would ask that the recognized delegates keep a bat phone handy. That's a little bit in jest, but at the very least, if you could leave notifications on to the Gov Alpha and delegates Discord channel, that is publicly viewable, so anyone can see if we do need to summon the delegates for any reason. But basically, the reason we're asking that is if there is an emergency proposal, we obviously would want to get it handled as quickly as possible, and would need your help. And that does it for the votes. I feel like I always talk a little bit too much there, but we'll gladly pass it off to Pablo for our MIPS update next.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Peyton. Hello, everyone. I somewhat sleep-deprived Pablo here, so forgive me if I fumble over my words a bit more than usual. So it's a pretty short update. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yep, so we've had a great many number of proposals this month that can make it into January's governance cycle. There's been no new additions and they've already been covered here, so I don't want to bore you cycling through that list again, but I will. I'll just try to make it a bit quicker. So we have two coordinated proposal sets, that is Tech Ops and Strategic Finance. I'm not forgetting Maker Talent, more on it later. We also have 5 MIPs, Intangible Asset Assignment, Delegate Compensation, Collateral Offboarding Process, Maker Keeper Network, and the tentatively named MIP 64, which is a MIPs Securities Bug Bounty Program. We have 5 budget modifications, including the removal of content production's current budget. We have a facilitator onboarding proposal for real-world finance for Will Remor specifically, and one for offboarding for the core unit. No, I'm sorry, and one for offboarding for Seth Goldfarb from content production. Also, we have one special purpose fund. I'll just share the link to the weekly MIPS update on the chat so that you can check whatever details you may want to check. Yep, moving on. As for actual real news now, MIP 41C5 SP2, that is the facilitator of boarding for real world finance, specifically for Sebastien Deribot, has been marked as withdrawn since Seb has decided to step down from the role on January 25th, 2022. Also, as you know, the Oracle gas cost budget posted by Newcomers has been forked and split by the aptly named user The Fork. This proposal will be eligible for formal submission on February. James McCall has posted the special purpose fund that I mentioned before, Create Real DAO SPF to make Moloch-based special purpose vehicles, and is looking for controllers for this SPF. So if any of you is interested, please reach out to him. Prospective coordinated maker talent will stay in RFC longer than it's formally required and won't be formally submitting on the upcoming governance cycle. Also, they will have a coordinated launchpad session on January. And finally, the guys from this spot and I have been working on the MIPS portal, catching and eradicating bugs. We just had a new iteration of the portal pushed to production. And I want to give a shout out to them for being great people to work with. And yep, I think that's pretty much it from me. Thank you.
I did get a request, Pablo, for our dates going into RFC with the new month and the break coming off. I just dropped the link to your forum, posted in the chat. I don't know if you want to remind people when they need to get their edits in by before we break for the rest of the month.
Yeah, so as for the upcoming governance cycle, the formal submission window will open on January the 3rd and will remain open until Wednesday the 5th. So the last day for modifications for the proposals that can make it into that cycle is December 29th, I believe. Yeah. I don't know if that's exactly the question or not, or if we're talking about the upcoming February's governance cycle.
That was my question, but yeah, why don't we let people know too if they're looking to get a proposal in by February, when they would need to post that by as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
also I wanted to mention that the votes and important dates calendar also has all of this information. So it has like final date for freezing, final date for posting, pretty much all of the info that Pablo makes available on that thread that Peyton put in the chat.
Right. Thank you, David. As for February, yes, the latest submission date for proposals in RFC should be January the 12th. In that case, again, I think that the link that Peyton shared on the chat is very useful. It has all the important MIP-related dates for 2022. So I suggest you guys check it. And if you still have any doubts after having checked it, please reach out to me and I'll try to make it clear for you.
Awesome, thanks, Pablo. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but got the question and thought more people would want to know it. So thank you. All right, let's take it away to Artem here for our kind of forum at a glance update.
Hey guys, just posted the link. All right, welcome to the forum at a glance. This is a weekly review of what's happened on the forums and for the week of December 9th to today, December 16th. This will be the last forum at a glance for the year of 2021. And we'll begin with our top announcements. So we could go to the next slide. There we go. All right. MakerBurn published their most recent updates. The MakerBurn website now contains improved dashboard statistics, burn auction features, a new chart visualizing recent liquidations, a new treasury page showing assets currently controlled by the DAO, new dashboard alerts, and MakerBurn bot upgrades along with other minor updates. So check it out. Next up, the SideStream Auction Services core unit present their unified auctions UI release, which aims to provide a one-stop solution that redirects users to relevant resources related to auctions. This also includes different UIs participating in collateral, surplus, or debt auctions. They also include auction-related analytics tools and existing keeper implementations. The release also includes an adjustable outcome wallet, which allows users to specify the receiver address. The SAS core unit also provides other changes along with a sneak peek into their upcoming features. And next up, the Bank of International Settlements, short for BIS, has released their quarterly review that specifically features DeFi and Maker. The review provides some good starting points for adjusting ourselves for upwind sailing along with this Cold War of regulations going on. Alan Peterson breaks down the BIS's concerns and provides some policy response recommendations, essentially structuring MakerDAO in a way to allow it for smoother sailing when it comes down to DeFi regulations. And now moving into the top 3 discussions. El Progreso believes it's time for OG DeFi applications, such as Maker Protocol, to level up as we transition over to 2022. That's because, as we have seen, the second half of 2021 has really cooled off the DeFi sector to the point of being undervalued, at least for Maker. Many other DeFi applications are now pushing for changes in 2022 to help improve their token or application value. This means that it's now time for Maker as well to cross to the next frontier, which is the multi-chain blockchain future. Well, the multi-blockchain future, whoops, the multi-blockchain future. So check out the post for more cool information and a lot more details involved in this. Next up, the platform threads are currently summarizing on-chain actions of recognized delegates. And this gives a good overview of their thinking process results, but it doesn't provide any hints about what's going on before making their decisions. In response, Shupi asks the community whether it would be helpful to provide additional updates around their thinking process prior to voting, and should we have this as something where the community interacts with individual delegates. And finally, Frank doesn't bring up issues or requests. Instead, he asks the community what makes everyone so passionate about Maker. So if you have any interesting comments on this, you can go jump in and post your story. And now moving on to our active signal requests. Data shows that there's some inefficiencies when it comes to how we buy back MKR, such as buying back more than 3% over market price. Just in case proposes to lower the beg with a B, helping retain more value to be burned. To offset some of the disadvantages, just in case would at the same time propose to increase the lot size. And our next signal request. Currently, 75,000 MKR would be needed to be burned in the ESM to allow for emergency shutdown. And this invites a risk where a single really heavy MKR holder may be compelled to trigger the emergency shutdown. In response, GFX Lab submits a request to determine whether to increase the ESM threshold. It's not believed that any single MKR holder currently holds more than 100,000 MKR. And thereby, GFX Lab asks the community whether we should raise the ESM threshold to 100,000 MKR. That's it. So for more information at the forum at a glance, go check out the post. It includes 3-point summary, evaluations and reports, ongoing initiatives, help wanted. And for this particular post, there's some details on what's coming up with the forum at a glance for next year, some updates and things like that. Thank you.
Nice. Look forward to checking that out. Thanks, Artem. All right. That concludes our governance wrap up, which brings us into issue discussions. I toss it over to David here for the introduction and see where it takes us.
Hey, yeah, sure. This is a conversation about newcomers, Anons, and sock puppets. Basically, this is coming up somewhat as a result of recent activity that we've seen on the forums, both with newer accounts proposing on behalf of other core units, as well as participating in signal requests, et cetera, et cetera. This discussion is kind of about how does the Maker community handle engagement from questionable sources? Do authors of proposals actually matter? How do we differentiate as a community like malice or trolling from controversial but legitimate proposals that are perhaps posted by people who want to preserve their privacy? And also, how do we kind of differentiate sock puppet accounts from newcomers who are very, potentially very real stakeholders who just don't participate very actively? So I prepared a few prompts, but the first one kind of talks about how we've historically handled it and basically how it's currently being handled. So the forum has been designed to allow newcomers to freely engage. So Discourse, the forum platform that we use, actually has a trust level functionality. We don't rely on it too much, but we do actually use it for a couple of different sections in the forum. For example, media inquiries. In order to post in media inquiries, you have to be a trust level 3 or higher. In order to actually post a thread, I believe you have to be in a specific group, being in the media group, which requires a level of verification from our team. But for the most part, the forum doesn't have, limits to newcomers. Usually newcomers are pretty free to post whatever they want. And the reason for that is because we recognize that not all stakeholders have, long-standing active forum accounts. There's definitely precedent for newcomers to come in the forum and to post very detailed, or very serious kind of concerns, right? How do we currently handle it, right? So I know that GovAlpha makes a note of it whenever there is suspicious activity on signal polls, for example. One concern that was raised was, how signal polls are not Sybil resistant, right? Like anybody can create 1 million forum accounts if they want. They can cultivate them and kind of make them seem legitimate over time, as we've seen on other platforms in other cases. But ultimately, it's kind of like, signal requests are the first step of the governance consensus process here at Maker. But really, like, nothing happens until a governance poll and then eventually an executive vote happens. So, MKR holders still have the ultimate say on votes and decisions. But of course, we want to have a higher integrity signal process. So at the moment, all that we really do, or all that GovAlpha really does, is make a note of it when there are when there is suspicious activity on signals. But from my understanding, that hasn't actually happened very much. And Peyton can confirm or deny that, or kind of bring me into reality here.
Yeah, basically, it's one of the checks we run before we put up a signal request, right? Or before we put up the signal request to the polling stage, rather, is just checking the votes and seeing like, hey, is this close? If so, are potential like suspicious votes causing the margin of error? And if so, we post to the community. We can do things like extend the poll, right? Ask for more participation, call out potentially questionable behavior. But generally speaking, like, there's not a ton of participation in signal requests, right? It's usually between 20 and 40 votes, and most of them are known entities. So your assessment is accurate that it is very rare that it rises to the level of needing to alert the community to it.
Yeah. Also, like, from the start, I believe the Maker community, its forum admins and moderators, like, have always valued kind of like, freedom of speech and your ability to really have freedom on this communications channel. So I know we've always treated censorship or over moderation kind of delicately. Like, we don't want to censor if we don't need to. We don't want to over moderate if we don't need to. And ultimately, like, we want to rely on kind of the natural mechanisms in place in the community for weeding out kind of weird behavior and weird, like, edge cases like this. But ultimately, that's kind of why I brought up, like, what does it really matter who brings up proposals, for example? Because the way I see it is, if it's a low effort proposal, it kind of naturally kind of gets treated that way. But if it's a high quality or well-reasoned proposal, even if it's posted by a total sock puppet account, I assume that people kind of treat the proposal for what's in it rather than who posts it. And I'm curious what people's thoughts are on that, or in general on this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if there's no strong, so from what I'm sensing, like, there isn't really very much like strong opinions or thought here, because it has been somewhat of like a non-issue. It's just its head has been showing in a few small cases. For example, like the case with the Oracle's core unit budget just now, as well as what's another case? Actually, I'm blanking, but yeah. Nick, do you have any thoughts that you would want to share about kind of this whole topic?
Sure. Yeah. So like you said, David, right? It hasn't really been that big of an issue. Oh yeah. Shout out to DeFi Saver first.
Nice.
It hasn't really been that big of an issue, and I don't want to make it about the Oracle proposal, because I think that's like very specific, because it's kind of goes much broader than that, right? It's not just who makes proposals, right? It's also the signal request. It's who gets to vote in the signal request, right? We've seen like instances of like other communities kind of come and like raid us, right? Where they all just make like a bunch of accounts that day, right? And then they try and sway the community sentiment, right, to be super bullish on whatever their collateral type is, right? We saw it with the Chainlink kind of org, or you know, maybe not the org, the organism, you know, trying to convince the community, right, that Chainlink oracles were the way to go, right, for MakerDAO, right? And I think we've dealt with them on like an ad hoc basis, right? And so they were kind of like, obviously it was a very like clear-cut situation, I think, and so it wasn't like very controversial or anything when we, you know, heavily moderated them. But I also think that a lot of these situations are not going to be as like clear-cut, right? Like David, for example, you mentioned kind of like the quality of a proposal, right? And the quality of a proposal is like very subjective type of thing, right? So you know, like you could have a high quality proposal coming from someone that has like no reputation to post something, right? And so I don't know if the answer is that, you know, like a fresh account can't post a proposal, because, you know, you could have like a super high quality proposal just coming from someone who's never posted before, like a lurker, right? So there is some kind of balance that we need to strike here. But I think the important thing is that we just define these things ahead of time. So then when we do this kind of moderation in the future, then it's not like we're just making up the rules as we go, right? There is a predefined set of guidelines that the communities kind of come up with that we can then point to. And it doesn't seem like there's some, you know, internal committee that's kind of like calling the shots, right? That's kind of the worst of both worlds, right? We definitely wouldn't want that.
Yeah, I see Brian with his hand up. Brian, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Can you hear me? Cool. So yeah, I mean,
And we lost you.
Oh, Brian.
Yeah.
that was fast.
That was pretty classic, actually.
Did he get Starlink too?
He has moved to like a more rural location, so it's might have
Mooney,
something to do
did
with it.
you recommend he get Starlink?
Yeah, I did, but apparently Starlink is suffering from supply chain stuff, so no one else can get Starlink now.
All right, well, while he fixes his connection there, we'll invite you back when you get it established, Brian. There's a lot of good chat in the side here. Would encourage people to like raise their hand if they do want to hop on the mic. But one conversation in particular I wanted to highlight from like GovAlpha's perspective is this conversation of like not being sure if someone's a sock puppet, right? And that's definitely one danger we see in terms of forcing us to make a determination, right, of what accounts are legitimate and not. But I see Brian's back here. That's about the end of my thought anyway, so pass it off to you. Oh, but now the mic's not coming through.
Can you hear me now?
Yay. That was a yes, sorry. But
We
then
have
also,
this of
No, it's not working, Brian.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, Brian, you're gonna have to leave us a voicemail or something.
Yeah, leave us a voicemail and I'll read it out with a Santa hat on.
Yeah, like one reason why I kind of was bringing up this question of like, do we just rely on the proposals themselves and not care about who is submitting them? And I know that that's like a very specific part of the conversation. There is also the other part of just general influence that Nick was bringing up, just by general participation in random discussion threads and et cetera, et cetera. But for proposals specifically, like the reason why like I asked it in that way is because we do operate in a community and in a way, where we respect pseudo anonymity, full identity kind of exposed people. Like we kind of accept people from all walks of privacy. And so, I see like in the chat, one thing that Seth is saying, right? Like in the real world, like you have a right to face your accuser. But in our world, it's kind of made a little bit muddy, right? Because of the fact that we're accepting of people who choose to cloak their identities, or to, have internet identities, right? So I'm curious, like, I don't see a reasonable way that we could require, or I don't even think we should require people's like identities. That's why I'm kind of trying to see what the culture is around not really caring who the accuser is, just caring about what it is that they're accusing you about. But anyway, just some of my thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to emphasize is that, when there is, some kind of anonymous unknown actor, you just have to place, or really you just want to be consistent at all times, and placing the emphasis on like the strength of the arguments on an objective basis from like publicly known facts, and, things that they say that, are unsubstantiated or can't be corroborated just kind of have to be thrown out.
Yeah, good point.
At the end of the day, right, like, right, the big I think complaint or concern here is that people with conflicts of interest will use anonymous accounts to mask their conflicts of interest. But at some point you just have to fall back to just what are the objective claims, and people who don't seem to be making objective claims will simply have to be ignored.
Yeah, and I think that that's where the action like of the community and voters has been. It's really been like, hey, like this vote is annoying, I have to think about it. But clearly, whatever the objective claim is, it's kind of like it's kind of vaporware, right? So I'm going to ignore it. Like that, I've seen that sort of sentiment for sure. So the second prompt that I have for this conversation is whether or not a proposal is ever considered illegitimate. Assuming it fulfills all the requirements of like the specific proposal or sub-proposal type. Yeah, I mean, I already kind of asked this in a way, does the author of the proposal matter? And how much energy should be given to lower quality or spam proposals or unsubstantiated proposals? Yeah, so I mean, we actually talked a bit about all of these things, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, I'm curious what other cases a proposal would be considered illegitimate. And in the next topic, actually, there's kind of a cool connection. But yeah, I'll leave that for them. Also, I want to be mindful of time. So Peyton, if we're like halfway through the hour and we need to move on to the second discussion topic, just let us know.
Yeah, we'll give it a few more moments. I was prepared for the arguments to mostly be on the other side, so most of my notes are kind of supporting the more anonymous, because I figured we do kind of have a clear bias, right, as people being comfortable here and talking on the call, right, for the most part, as well as identify core unit people. But like one risk, I guess, that we haven't talked about and is worth considering is like the ability to spam proposals, right, to sabotage essentially through this leniency, right? Like if you're a competitor or don't like Maker or DeFi or whatever your particular brief is, like it could become very easy to spin up an account and make proposals for the sole purpose of forcing the community to take time to respond to them.
Yeah, Seth said it well in the chat. Punish with the process.
Yeah.
I think it's like any spam problem, right? Like I don't think we need to borrow trouble yet, but if that does end up happening, we can always just, I don't know, gate things on like MKR or something like that. Like the forums could, validate that you hold some amount of MKR I don't think that we should re-optimize for that, by the way, because I think we should do whatever we can to maintain an anonymous culture.
Agreed.
But yeah, so we should maybe that should be the general rule. Anytime we run into a sort of major problem with the anonymous culture, we should seek the sort of least inhibiting way to still allow for that culture to like flourish, but without like just outright like banning anons, right? So
Yeah.
I'm gonna try again here. So we've got this. We already embrace Anons, right? We've got Long for Wisdom, who no one here I don't think knows who he is, but he's built a reputation, and like there's this bicameral type of governance that we have here with Maker, like plutocratic weight, and then you know, a social layer which, you know, allows people who without the wealth to be able to participate in governance meaningfully. But in general, like you'd want those people to have a social stake, right? Like we care about stake in Ethereum, and at a social level, we should care about social stake. Ideas do not exist in a vacuum, especially anything regarding financial considerations. Like there's conflicts of interest. There are competing core units and competing protocols, and you know, we want to be able to understand what those are, to have the full perspective around a proposal. And again, anything involving finance, you need to follow the money, and if you can't follow the money, and I don't know how we can enforce that, right? But it may be just something for people to keep in mind when looking at a proposal, like how much social credit does this person have? And I definitely don't want like social credit scores, but there is a very subjective approach that we can take to viewing these things. And like I said, there's nothing that says that Maker can't be a community of Anons. I would like to be an Anon myself, but I've spent many years, and you know, many of us have spent many years using our own identities and building that reputational stake in the DAO. So yeah, when a new account gets spun up and it just comes in to create a post that seems to be stirring the pot, I guess for me personally, I'm going to take the side of the entity that has the greater social stake, that has the reputation in the community, than just taking the ideas as they're presented, because we don't know what those ideas are being backed up with. I'm going to get off my soapbox.
Very good points. And I guess like those points actually also reinforce a culture where any like external or like semi external stakeholders actually do put in the work to establish some sort of social reputation. But I'm still a bit concerned about like stakeholders that are big, that don't participate, that, you know, eventually will come in and kind of share something, and like maybe the community won't take it seriously. Like,
well, I mean, you can build that up, right? Like if
right.
Dragonfly comes in and decides they want to make a post after many years of not posting, like they'll identify themselves as someone with Dragonfly, and we will take the credit that they've built elsewhere and apply that. I think Ashley came in and posted something after never having posted, but we know who she is, right? She's got a history with Maker and with other protocols. So yeah, if your goal is to create a new account to stir the pot and you know, not provide any other context, like I'm personally not going to give it that much credit.
I agree. I feel like it's a cop-out in a way. Like you can tell people that are making a proposal that's like controversial and they're using an Anon account just because they don't want to use their like real identity. But I mean, at the same time, I think you just have to look at the content of the proposal and not the person creating it. But like in my opinion, and I think probably a lot of other people's, it's just the cop-out, you know? It's like the easy way to do something controversial and not associate it with like your like reputation or whatever. But something that I wanted to talk about, I'm just like curious on everyone's thoughts, is like people making proposals like outside of a core unit. It's an interesting thing to me because like in some ways it makes sense, but then in some ways I don't know if it does, but it seems like an interesting topic of discussion, like related to budget. I don't know if it makes sense, but I mean, relating to offboarding, I get that. I mean, someone within the core unit can't make that proposal, but I was just wondering like what people in core units think about that.
Katie, that is so awesome that you brought that up because it perfectly segues into the next discussion topic. So this, what you brought up is actually prompt number 2, right? What do we think about submitting proposals on behalf of another CU? But just to kind of center the conversation, like really it's about core unit sort of, what is it right here? Yeah, core unit proposals and dispute methods. Like, so when somebody does propose something on behalf of another core unit, it's kind of like a stronger signal of a dispute. But really like this is kind of my attempt to map out what are other ways to dispute before you go nuclear, so to speak. And so these are kind of like the available dispute methods that the public has, right? For disagreeing or whatever with core units, right? There's complaining. You could complain directly to the facilitator. That's probably the best first thing that you could do. Actually talk to the core unit who you have a problem with. Then there's like complaining to surrounding actors, right? Delegates, for example, hey, like, why isn't this core unit doing its thing? And then there's like the third sort of escalation of complaining, which is publicly on the forum. You know, you go and you make a case. It's not a proposal, it's just a discussion, right? Like, why isn't this core unit performing, right? Or something. But then beyond that, I believe Greg proposed and Maker Governance passed MIP 52, which is actually a dispute resolution process that we've never actually used, but it is available as a tool for governance and for people. But if you disagree with a core unit or mandated actor's actions, you could submit a dispute to Maker voters using that process. And then like the third sort of most like aggressive way that you could dispute with a core unit is like through the proposal process itself. So first of all, you can campaign against active proposals. So we've seen that most with like budgets, for example. People push back on budgets, or they'll straight up say like no, or they'll propose an alternative budget, as we've seen. And then there's, besides campaigning for active proposals, there's proposing, offboarding a facilitator, or like proposing something directly. And that's kind of like the question that you brought up, Katie. Is it reasonable for other people to propose, MIP 39, 40, and 41 sub-proposals on behalf of another core unit, right? And that's kind of where the whole conversation is at. So yeah, bringing it back to your question, I'm going to let people respond.
Cool. Yeah, maybe.
Well, okay, go on, Nick.
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
We have the same uncomfortable silence timer. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that this, in a way, happens to protocol engineering fairly frequently. I think when and actually even before protocol engineering, when we were still like part of us were in the foundation, the DAO basically drives initiatives by throwing sort of maker weight around. And I think we tended to pay attention to requests on behalf of like, our CU from other actors when MKR actually voted for those requests to go through. I think I would find it pretty frustrating if we had to like battle complaints and perceptions in the forums constantly. But I can see that, sometimes that's probably better than allowing someone else to like, I don't know, convince MKR holders of something incorrect or whatever. But yeah, so that I was just gonna say, like, our roadmap is pretty heavily decided by the DAO. I mean, I think we protocol engineering suggests stuff too, and I feel like that's probably true for a lot of core units. Is that the core units basically serve at the pleasure of MKR holders. So in a way, MCAR holders kind of can drive us a little bit. But yeah, so now like without taking that sort of MCAR weight into account, like, you know, where do we draw the limit where we don't get randomized by like you know, anons on stuff in like signal requests, and we can actually like still execute. And I think for our group, it's been paying attention to where MKR holders vote. I yield to Nick, though. The true St. Nicholas.
Hey guys. Yeah, so I would just like to have like a little bit more of a defined process. Like I really don't like talking about like incidents. So for example, right, the recent incidents with collateral offboarding, or like the recent incidents with like my budget getting forked or whatever. I just want to have guidelines kind of for the future, because I think those are kind of more important than whatever singularity or whatever we want to call it, right? So I think on the one hand we kind of have this like philosophical argument, right? Mooney kind of mentioned this one thing of, right, you know, we already kind of base our direction within the core units on, you know, the sentiment that we see in the community, right, and you know how we kind of see the voting going on different proposals. But then you kind of get to more minute things. So for example, with facilitator offboarding, right, there's no way to like involuntarily, right, offboard. Like if you don't give the community to the power to kind of offboard someone who doesn't want to be offboarded, right, then you're severely handicapping them, right? So okay, in a sense, the community does need to have the power to just to submit an offboarding proposal for a core unit facilitator. Okay, but is that kind of the case for every aspect of a core unit? And so in the case of budget, I would kind of argue no, and kind of here's why. So you start a core unit and you have a mandate, and you promise that you're going to do certain things, you know, on your kind of roadmap, say within the next year, within this budget cycle, whatever time period your budget cycle is. And then you need to execute on that mandate. You need to execute on that roadmap. And only you as the facilitator are going to have the insight of like what kind of resources you need to execute on that. And it seems like to me that the natural way that this should go is that the facilitator submits the proposal. The community says, you know, hell no, that's too much. We don't like that. And then the facilitator has to go back and like retool their budget, right? And it comes with, okay, let me reduce my mandate because with less money, I can't fulfill all those obligations anymore, right? And there's this back and forth, right, until you do actually manage to pass the budget, right, and then you're good. That seems like a much more natural way to do things than for the facilitators basically to have to deal with like external budgets coming in, where they then have to figure out, okay, like it seems like a weird way to do it. Here's your pile of money. Okay, now figure out what to do with it, right? It's kind of like how also like in the US like departments, right? They all get allocated like a certain amount of cash, and then they have like, you know, something left over at the end of the year. And since they don't want their budgets to be lowered, you know, if they don't spend something, they all go and buy like ridiculous crap and just try to, you know, spend all of the money by the end of the year. So next year they can get a similar budget. I think that's a little bit tangential here, but I think the flow of like facilitators submitting budgets and then the community giving feedback on those budgets and potentially voting them down if they really disagree is like a much more like natural way to do this than for facilitators having to like embattle like alternative like budgeting proposals. It's also kind of weird, like, so for example, like in my case, right, where the resulting budgeting proposals, right, we're just kind of splitting mine up, right? I think that's a little bit of a unique case. But let's say, what if like multiple people had submitted different budgets for the Oracle core unit? So let's say David had submitted one, and Katie had submitted one, and Mooney had submitted one for the Oracle core unit, right? And so now you have a bunch of, you know, Oracle core unit budgets going into the either same governance cycle or different governance cycles, right? There's like a breakdown of process here, right? So I think I'm not saying, you know, we have to do it the way that I'm thinking, but I think we do need to redefine the core unit MIP to put more guardrails in place so we don't end up with these kind of like breakdowns of process.
Thanks for sharing there, Nick. And yeah, coming to you, just in case, one of our recognized delegates.
Well, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me because I'm out on travel right now. So the health of this internet connection is severely in dispute. So if I should drop out or if my voice breaks out, you'll have to forgive me on that one. I actually asked a question before we segue to this segment of it, if there's any good reason for people outside of a core unit to actually make a budget proposal. Because as was said here, that I don't think anyone outside a core unit actually has any real way of knowing what was supposed to go into it. And I think the community as such, there is actually a mechanism to handle disagreement with the budget. It's that core units has to reapply their budget. Whenever the core unit has a reapply, the community gets a chance to speak out against it. If you go in and do micromanagement of the budgets throughout the year or throughout the budget period, it's just going to make a mess out of everything, and the core units are going to be end up focused on the unit of their budgets, and if anything they do might be conceived as controversial, and we will lose all progress. So I think once a budget proposal is accepted, we will have to live with that for a while until the next time it comes up, and then we have a chance to do something about it. And as was mentioned here, we do have the offboarding process if someone is doing something extremely controversial. And maybe in some cases we need offboarding for an entire core unit if we for some reason deem that the necessity of this core unit has earned its course. But I think that those things are natural to do in conjunction with a budget proposal or the renewal of a budget proposal, because things doesn't happen that quickly that we can't, you know, wait 1 quarter or 6 months or how long it takes for the next budget proposal to come up again. And that makes for a more sensible approach to the subject matter, in my opinion, at least.
Awesome. So I guess I could provide some backdrop there to answer your question, like if it ever does make sense. From a like political science perspective, right, the power of a purse is like a pretty important checks and balances, right? Like we delegate a lot of authority to core units. We allow them to block proposals, to insert them directly into on-chain voting. Basically, a lot of permissions that could be abused if taken in the worst case scenario. So one advantage to allowing others to post this is that, you know, if a core unit is particularly powerful or particularly influential, and they're doing something that the community has, you know, maybe not liked, right? Maybe suggested they change and they don't want to change it. You know, you have very little recourse if the leverage is all on the community, all on the core unit facilitator side. That doesn't mean there aren't other ways we can solve that, right? That's just, I guess, providing opposite perspective as to one reason why we might want to keep that in place.
Yeah, like I wrote it in the chat, but permissionless proposals are supportive of general decentralization of governance at Maker. But I think like the key problem that Nick and like so many others are kind of like pointing at is it might not make sense with specific proposals. Like for offboarding, Blimpa mentioned, like there is a component that sets a precedent for actual offboarding. In the budget MIP, like you don't have that. You don't have like, oh, use this component to like alter somebody else's budget. And I think like, you know, there are way more sensible ways of approaching that specific kind of dispute, as Justin mentioned, right? But yeah, I don't think that in general, we should be restricting like proposals, but in very specific cases, it might make sense with, especially with the budget proposals. So like, I don't know how it would look like, but if that happens, like I guess Gov Alpha would be able to kind of deem it illegitimate, like, or what would it look like if it were restricted? Would it just be ignored? Would there need to be like an explicit sort of statement for each time it happens?
Yeah, we would need to pass something through our MIP structure that says, you know, only X is allowed or X is or Y is not allowed, right? So then less of Gov Alpha can point to that and say the community passed this, which deemed this proposal illegitimate. Yeah, and
okay, got it.
And we would not sign up for anything that involves like discretion, right? Like we would want it to be very clear in terms of like, I don't know, maybe that was too harsh, but like basically anything that could call our neutrality into question, right? Like if we're having to make judgment calls where it's, you know, in a situation where it's likely for bias to come in there, like that's not a situation we'd be supportive of. However, the community can pass whatever they want, and we'll do our best job to enforce what they pass. But that is something I'd be mindful of when bringing the proposal forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's also like this thing is popping up in my head of like hard rules versus soft rules. Like, so soft rules are kind of like things that the entire active community sort of understands, but there's no hard rule to codify it or to enforce it. It's just sort of naturally enforced. So for example, you know, the next time somebody, you know, posts a budget proposal on behalf for some other core unit, like we had this conversation, like everybody kind of knows, oh, you know, just ignore it. Like you don't have to give it much thought. But then, you know, there's kind of the hard, like, you know, at what point do we want to put in a harder rule where it's like, oh, you know, like regardless of what anybody thinks, at some point in the past, we have made a rule, okay, like it never makes sense. Like, is that the benchmark, that when it never makes sense that you make a hard rule? Or should it really be just kept as a soft rule so we could save on like the governance overhead of it all? Yeah, Blimp, I see your hand raised.
Yep. Sorry, I was reading Nicholas' comment in the chat. Are there any cases where the community might want to set the budget to 0 instead of affording a core unit? Actually, MIP 39C3 is the process for removing core units, and the conditions for such as a proposal to be submitted is that the core unit to be afforded should not have any active budget nor active facilitators. So it's kind of a prerequisite to afford a core unit to remove the budget and the facilitator in a prior instance. So yeah, maybe that process should be revised.
So interesting. Yeah, Wouter put his hand up.
Yes, I just want to quickly build on what Pros was saying and what I was putting in the chat. I think it's about the community giving permission to the core unit to do certain things, right? So to call yourself an official facilitator is a permission that is allowed by the community to that person, and as such can be taken away. The putting the budget stream in place, so the payment stream, is a permission granted by the community and as such can be taken away. To assign any official roles, to give any privileges, for example, as a mandated actors, having access to certain information or joining calls that are off limits for others. These are permissions that can be taken away. Anything that falls outside of that really doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's, as I wrote, it's like the ownership of the core unit. You can't tell someone to, or you can't force someone to do something in a certain way simply by voting a MIP about it, right? Like I can't submit a MIP that says that Chris Mooney has to wear a Christmas hat every week, or I would have already done it. So because these are not permissions that were given by the community to that individual. And I think if we want to formalize it, it's probably good to be formal about these kind of permissions that we're granting. And then you have a very good framework to say, well, you can, if you grant them, you can take them away. And then there's the kind of edge case that I brought up, which is simply consent. You can just about propose anything if the party that is involved consents to it or supports it. So that's the other case, right? So you can take permissions away that you have previously given. You can propose anything if it's with consent. Anything that falls outside of that is not useful, I think.
So the only like example I can really think of that might counteract that, and again, it might be balanced out by the rest of the argument, is like initiative specific funding. So I'm going to use me and my core unit as an example, just so that doesn't apply to anyone else. But like, you know, the community obviously would know I spent a lot of time working on like our source code instance, right? So what if we get to the point where the community feels we're spending too much money on source code, right? But because this is my pet project, I don't want to get rid of it. This is hypothetical, but let's say that was the mindset I was taking on, was that, you know, I'm not going to listen to the community. Like, Gov Alpha is important. You guys aren't going to vote us down. So I'm leaving the source code funding in place. Because it's a part of our budget, like it is much harder to address that like through other governance methods. So that's potentially one scenario where the lack of consent for that particular program might make sense. Happy to hear other thoughts there.
Yeah, but
I would disagree. I would disagree because, you know, what you propose is the full package, right? It's not like a menu and we can pick and choose. It's like, this is what we're proposing, and it includes the full package, and we're willing to do all the other things that are in the proposal if it also includes the substantial budget for source credit or whatever, right? Any other input from the community is based on your consent. It's like, I want to do all these other things, and then I also want to fund source cred, and I would like to go for the highest option, but I would consent to a lower budget. But there is no, the only thing that can be taken away there is just the permission and the package deal, right? So I do think it fits within this frame of thinking.
I mean, also there's like other dispute methods that can happen, you know, before you go nuclear, right? Like, you know, if you disagree with the funding of one program that's in a big budget package, you could post about it. You could put up a signal request about it. You can try to influence the core unit itself to see your reasoning for why we think, you know, or they think this program doesn't make sense, right? If there's like a total disagreement, you could bring it to MKR voters through MIP 52, right? So like I think that with the tools that exist, there's really never a case where a direct sort of budget proposal, like a disruptive budget proposal, should be proposed on, you know, from a third party, you know, without consent. But yeah, that's kind of the view that I'm gravitating towards. Like ultimately, if like this whole, like using your example, Peyton, if a program was approved in your budget and in your mandate, but 3 months into the 6 months, it's like people are realizing, oh, this is not working. Like there should be a way for people to communicate that, right? I see Juan with his hand up.
I'm wondering what we are trying to fix actually, because I don't like. It's not that we have like a very large amount of you can call it spam if you want, but I can see a lot of use cases, and maybe I'm too naive and they will never show up. But for example, when Marcoms was proposing the moonshot fund and all that, what if someone had said, "Hey, this is your new kind of like forked budget. There's no moonshot fund anymore," and then everyone's like, "Yeah, now it makes sense." Maybe the history would have been different. I think Pro's example was maybe good too. Like someone's like, "Okay, no, you're spending too much on that process or whatever. So we're splitting that, and then it's up to you to accept it or not. And maybe we should fix governance or the process for that." But I can see where ideas should flow more naturally, and we should not be judging the author unless it becomes problematic. But I think that there are different conversations. Yeah, what if a maker holder, it could be like a shadow delegate, they want to propose something. What are they supposed to do? Start posting and build a reputation, or are they supposed to dox themselves? Should we start KYCing every MKR holder? I think that the answer is no. I think that probably everyone in this call agrees with me. So yeah. I mean,
I guess
Brian
like
is saying
Juan,
motive matters.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
like the thing that people are bringing up is like motive matters. Like to some extent, like yes, like who cares about the author? It's about the proposal. But on the other side, like, you know, what about the motive? What about the conflicts of interest? And I think that's kind of like the nexus point of where this issue is.
I don't think it's just motive. I think it's like the operational overhead for the core units, at least from my perspective. So like outsiders making proposals about core units, about like their internal operations, like whether it's budget or anything really. I don't know like what could be like another example, but it seems like that just causes a lot of like operational overhead for the core units. But then I also understand the argument of everyone's voting on these proposals, so anyone should be allowed to create them. But then, yeah, the other side of that is it's just like operationally inefficient.
Yeah, it will be inefficient like every DAO. I think that we have facilitators exactly for this, to deal with this kind of stuff. If someone posted, I don't know, probably the least controversial core unit is Gov Alpha right now. So if someone posted something against Gov Alpha or to defund them, I don't think that anyone would take that seriously. So I don't know. I don't know if we should start. It sounds like we are against criticism. We are against, and it's very dangerous to portray this image to the wider or to the broader community. Like we don't want to be like, oh, the core units within Maker, they don't accept criticism. Now you need to do A, B, and C to actually criticize them. I think that the answer should be like post solid work and make sure that we're doing our best. And yeah, if it becomes too problematic, the spam, then maybe we should solve that in a different way. Maybe every proposer should have, I don't know, some staked MKR or the, I don't know, 3 facilitators proposing that. That's potentially also dangerous. I don't know. I don't want to create groupthink within Maker and make us into this group of people that just became too strong and we cannot improve because no one can take us well or say anything against us really.
I mean, my thinking is that, you know, being able to take criticism is a core fundamental like thing that, you know, all core units should preserve. Like you should be able to take criticism. I guess like the thing that I'm trying to fix, going back to your original question, Juan, is not necessarily to fix it, but more how do we go about criticizing core units in a less like operationally disruptive way? Like you want to totally preserve the ability for people to call people out on stuff, right? But I saw Justin had his hand up, so I will end my thought there.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, in general, I think we should put as few restrictions on proposals as possible. But I think there's something to be said about things that occur on a regular basis. I don't think there's much value in discussing the same proposals over and over again. And it can cause engagement fatigue. Like if every month we're discussing someone's budget because someone has posted a new budget proposal, at some point people are going to sort of give up on that conversation and not be engaged anymore. So I think for processes that are defined at regular intervals, I think those might be restricted to those predetermined intervals because they will be discussed, and we're not skipping the discussion. We're merely making sure we're not spending bandwidth on something that will be discussed anyway.
Good reflection. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I might do another call for people outside of core units. I know we've been talking a lot, and this is a issue where we're obviously more biased. So that's the reason I'm calling for other voices as well.
Peyton, how are we on time and stuff? I know it's a little bit past the hour at least.
Yeah, yeah. Typically, this is about when we look to wrap up. Though we do put the other 15 minutes on the calendar for a reason. So happy to end here if there's nothing further, but also don't want to cut the good conversation short. I guess one thing might be important to say is, like, from a governance process, like, you know, if you hear this discussion, you think that something should be changed, like it would either probably need to be a new MIP or an amendment to the core unit budget MIPs that would address what we're talking about. Yeah, and as with any proposal, GalvAlpha is here to provide feedback, help you with the governance process. If that is something you want to undertake and unsure about how to go through it. But yeah, absent of anything like that, we would just keep interpreting the rules as we have been, which is that it is permissionless. So as long as proposals satisfy any other requirements that we've already put in place, they would be treated as legitimate and brought to vote when formally submitted.
Yeah, I also just want to make a contextual note, like although like this isn't a huge problem in our community now, like we do just see little blips of kind of like edge cases popping up. So I think like as MakerDAO grows, it's important to have these conversations with the wider community so that it's not just a handful of people thinking about this. And so, yeah, like that's the main motivation for bringing this up. Like we want, yeah, we want reasonable and like normal processes, and we want to do things the right way. And we want to do them in a way that preserves the values of our community.
The fun part is the people proposing, in effect, get to shape our values as well, through how they're accepted and engaged with. So yeah, thank you everyone for engaging with this. As mentioned, at least in the chat, I can't remember if I've said it yet, this is our last call of 2021. So really appreciate all the attendance. This is probably one of our better attended meetings, and it's really great to have so much participation.
Look out for the Maker annual governance review that our team is going to put out, I believe, first week of January.
And I'm trying to find confirmation, but I'm fumbling. We are planning to be back the first Thursday of January. Is that correct, David?
Awesome. Yeah, that's my understanding.
So that would be January 6th, I believe. So won't have to go too long without your governance and risk all fixed there.
Yeah, just 2 weeks of no GNR.
Right on. Well, thank you for everyone coming. You know, December is a month ripe with a lot of holidays, so happy holidays to anyone who's celebrating, and yeah, look forward to seeing you next year.